Hello and welcome to my beginner's tanking guide for the Protection Paladin in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. If you're coming to this video from one of the other videos in the series, you can check the timestamps below to skip the introduction and get right to the new content. In this video series, we're going to be covering a variety of topics designed to help brand new Paladin tanks, or those of you who have been tanking for a little while, but maybe still feel like there's something that you're missing. All sorts of goodies are going to be in the description box below. You'll find timestamps, links to all the other videos in this series, a link to the playlist that contains these videos, as well as any other supplemental information that I think is going to help you as you learn how to tank on the Protection Paladin. The pinned comment on this video is going to contain any updates or corrections that I have to the guide so that it can stay current for as long as possible. Alright, before we get started, a couple of disclaimers. First off, I'm not going to be covering any spells in our spell book that come from talents. We're only going to cover the baseline spells that you're going to have regardless of what talent you have selected. Also, as I'm going through the spells and abilities, I'll be placing them down onto my action bar in sort of predetermined spaces I have set up based on what the ability does and what we use it for. As we get to a different section of the bar, I'll explain what that section is for and why I put certain abilities there. You're welcome to follow along with the way I organize things. You can obviously organize them however you like, but I am going to be using a similar layout when I do the dungeon run demonstration on how to tank on a Protection Paladin at the end of this guide series. So if you want to follow along with that and try to keep pace with what I'm doing, it is a good idea to kind of set your action bars up a similar way and then change them later down the road if you want to. Alright, our first ability is going to be Ardent Defender, and this is what I would call a big defensive cooldown, and for tanks, I like to put those on my main action bar over on the right hand side. Now this ability is an instant cast ability with a 2-minute cooldown. It's going to reduce all damage you take by 20% for 8 seconds. So this is just a good damage mitigation buff that you can put onto yourself, but it has a bonus effect here in the second paragraph. While Ardent Defender is active, the next attack that would otherwise kill you will instead bring you to 20% of your maximum health. So first off, if you're at like 30 or 40% of your maximum health and you just take this big blow that is just going to decimate you and kill you, you'll instead just drop down to 20% of your health. If you're already under 20% of your health, let's say you're at 5% and you take a hit that kills you, it's actually going to put you back up to 20%. So it's a little better than like just saving you from the next hit. If you're really low, then it is going to act as sort of like a passive heal in a way as well. Either way, this is a good oh crap button to push when you feel like you're getting close to death, because you're going to get some damage mitigation, which is going to delay that, but then if it does happen, you're going to get that 20% maximum health restoration instead. Our next ability is Avenger Shield. This is part of our core rotation. When I say core rotation, I'm talking about the abilities that we're going to be using every single fight over and over and over again, and the ones that generally have a kind of short cooldown so that we're able to use them over and over again. Now, do note as we're getting into this ability that I'm going to be talking about the cooldown that's on my tooltip as I'm explaining these spells and abilities. Yours may be slightly different based on how much cooldown reduction you have on your gear, but it should be pretty close to what I have. Alright, so Avenger Shield is a ranged ability. It's got a 30-yard range. It's an instant cast ability with a 14-second cooldown. It's going to hurl your shield at the enemy, dealing a moderate amount of damage, interrupting and silencing any non-player target that's hit, and then it will jump to 3 additional nearby enemies. Alright, so let's take that piece by piece. First of all, we get to throw our shield like Captain America. That's pretty sweet. We do a little bit of damage, so we establish some threat on the target that we're attacking. We're also going to interrupt and silence that target, so stop them from casting any spells or abilities that they might be trying to pull off. Then our shield is going to bounce to a couple of other targets as well, establishing threat on those, dealing a little bit of damage too. Now, the silence and interrupt effect only takes place on your main target, so it's not going to silence and interrupt everyone that gets hit, but it is nice to know that you can interrupt someone with this ability. Now, this ability is really important to your rotation and making sure that all your spells are having a good synergy, so you won't always be able to save this specifically to interrupt something, but it is always nice to get that as a little added bonus when you do that. So this is a great ability that you're going to use a lot of the time, especially to do your initial pull. And we're going to talk about the second paragraph on this ability a little bit later when we touch on the ability here mentioned, Shield of the Righteous, but we'll just read it real quick. This will increase the effects of your next Shield of the Righteous by 20%. So we'll come back to that when we see what Shield of the Righteous is. Our next ability is Avenging Wrath. This is what I call a big offensive cooldown ability. So this is an instant cast ability with a 2-minute cooldown. You call upon the light to become an avatar of retribution, increasing your damage, healing, and critical strike chance by 20% for 20 seconds. Your first Light of the Protector will critically strike while this is active. So we're going to talk about that last line when we get around to Light of the Protector. For now, we know that our damage is going to increase, so we're going to get some additional damage on enemies, which translates to killing those important targets fast and also gaining more threat on enemies. We're also going to increase our healing, so we do have a few ways to self-heal as a paladin, and this is going to boost that as well. And then we have our critical strike increased, which is important for one of our abilities, which we'll look at a little bit later. So all in all, this is a good button to push when you want to increase your offensive capabilities, increase your critical strike, or maybe increase your healing. Next on the list is Blessing of Freedom. And this is a utility ability. I like to put those up here on the top action bar we have over to the left. And this is one of 3 different blessings that we have, and they do share some similarities that we're going to touch on as we go through them here. Now this one costs us 1400 mana, has a 40-yard range, is instant cast, and has a 25-second cooldown. And what this will do is bless a party or raid member, or yourself if you want to cast it on yourself, and grant immunity to movement impairing effects for 8 seconds. So if you're going to get slowed or snared or anything like that, Blessing of Freedom will prevent that. Our next blessing is Blessing of Protection, and this is another big defensive cooldown. 3000 mana, 40-yard range, instant cast with a 5-minute cooldown. Pretty hefty cooldown there. But this will bless a party or raid member, granting immunity to physical damage and harmful effects for 10 seconds. So this is going to prevent, people wailing on you with swords and axes, but this is not going to prevent fireballs from hitting you in the face. So this is physical damage only. Also, if we look at the second paragraph here, we're going to run into something that happens with a few of our Protection Paladin abilities, and that is this debuff called Forbearance. So when you cast Blessing of Protection on someone, you're going to cause Forbearance to appear on them for 30 seconds. So they're going to have this Forbearance debuff. And if they have that, you're not able to use your Blessing of Protection on a target with that debuff. So essentially you have some very powerful defensive abilities on a Protection Paladin that when you use them, they're insane. They're really, really good. But as a consequence of that, because they're so good, your target is going to get this little debuff, which means that they can't just constantly back-to-back chain these sorts of abilities. There's going to be a 30-second window where you can't use them on that target. And you're going to see this pop up in a couple more abilities, and we'll talk about it then. Our last blessing is Blessing of Sacrifice, and you could really consider this either a defensive cooldown or an offensive cooldown. And this kind of comes into mindset. When I'm on a tanking specialization, I tend to think of defensive cooldowns as abilities that help me keep me alive. And I think of offensive cooldowns as abilities that either disrupt the enemy or help me do a better job of protecting my allies. So defense protects me, offense makes me do my job of a tank, which is to protect the health pools of the other characters more effectively. So I would actually probably put Blessing of Sacrifice over into the offensive cooldown area because it doesn't really protect you, but it helps you do your job as a tank more effectively. So this is going to cost us 1400 mana, 40-yard range, instant cast, 2-minute cooldown. It's going to bless a party or raid member, reducing their damage taken by 30%. And you suffer 100% of the damage prevented. So essentially, if one of your party members is constantly getting hit for 100 damage every swing, you could put Blessing of Sacrifice on them and they'll only get hit for 70, but you'll start taking 30 points of damage every time they get hit. This will last for 12 seconds or it'll shut off if any of the damage that you would take, that 30 points, would cause you to drop below 20% of your maximum health. So this is, generally speaking, a better ability to use when you are at high health and you're just trying to mitigate the damage that someone else is taking. Because if you are at like 22% health and you cast this on someone, they're going to take like 1 or 2 hits and then it's going to shut off because you're going to hit 20% of your health from the damage that you're taking. So generally you want to use this with a higher health pool. Next up, we have Cleanse Toxins. Cleanse Toxins is a utility ability that we're not going to use very often, and I like to put those above where I put the big defensive cooldowns, just to show that they are utility abilities, but to kind of keep them separate from the abilities we probably will use pretty often. So Cleanse Toxins is a ranged ability. It costs us 1300 mana. It's instant cast, has an 8-second cooldown, and it will cleanse a friendly target, removing all poison and disease effects from them. So why aren't we using this very often? Well, generally this is going to be the responsibility of the healer, and you should be using your other abilities to keep people alive, keep the enemy focused on you. However, we do have this available if we need it, or if it makes sense to use it in a fight where we really know that we're going to need it. So we put it on our bar so that we can remember that it's there, and it is available if it makes sense to use it. Next up, we have Consecration. Consecration is one of our core rotational abilities. This is an instant cast ability with a 4.3 second cooldown. It's going to consecrate the land beneath you, causing it to deal holy damage over 12 seconds to all enemies who enter the area. And there's a limit of 1. So basically you can only have 1 consecrated area out at a time. It's a big circle of holy light underneath you, and any enemies that are in that circle are going to take damage over time. So this is going to help you to maintain threat on multiple enemies, since they're all going to be taking damage as long as they're in the area. And there are some added bonuses for you being inside your consecration that we're going to see a little bit later on. The next ability here is Contemplation. This is just a miscellaneous ability. It doesn't start in your spell book. You can get this by buying an item, and it just puts down a beam of light, lets you kneel in it, and look super paladin-y. So we're going to throw that off over here to the right, where we put the rest of our abilities that we don't really use in combat. Our next ability is Divine Shield. This is another big defensive cooldown, and one of the best ones that we have. This is an instant cast ability with a 5-minute cooldown, so another hefty cooldown here, but it grants immunity to all damage and harmful effects for 8 seconds. So this is total damage nullification. Doesn't matter if it's physical, magical, if it was a dot that was on you, it doesn't matter. And this is one of our 3 abilities that is going to cause Forbearance. So if a target already has Forbearance, you can't use Divine Shield on them. If they don't have Forbearance and you use Divine Shield, then they'll have Forbearance on them for 30 seconds, preventing you from using your other really cool, really awesome defensive cooldowns on them for that duration. Next up, we have Divine Steed. This is a movement utility ability. It's instant cast with a 45-second recharge. It starts with 2 charges, and this is going to cause you to leap atop your charger for 3 seconds, increasing movement speed by 100%. You can use this while indoors or in combat. So you get 2 charges of this, and mainly on a Protection Paladin, you're going to be using this to either get out of a big AoE attack that you're trying to avoid, or you'll be using it when moving from room to room or group to group, just to kind of keep pace with the rest of the group, because you don't have a lot of ways to increase your speed when you're just running around compared to a lot of other classes and specializations. Next, we have Flash of Light. This is a utility healing ability that we're not going to use very often, and I'll explain why. So Flash of Light costs over 5,000 mana. It does have a 40-yard range. It's a 1.4 second cast. It expends a large amount of mana to quickly heal a friendly target for about 12,000 health. So, first off, 5,000 mana is a huge amount. If we look at my character here, I have 20,000 mana. So I could cast Flash of Light probably 4 times, and then I'm completely out of mana. Then we run into the situation I spoke about in the introduction, where there are certain abilities, like Blessing of Protection, that I'm not going to be able to cast because I don't have any mana, which typically is a situation we shouldn't run into as a Protection Paladin. Next up, 12,000 health. I'm sitting at 143,000. So we're looking at maybe healing 8% of my health bar. So across 4 heals, we would run completely out of mana and only heal ourselves for about 30% of our health bar if we're lucky. So this is just an ineffective way to heal yourself, and we have better ways to heal ourselves as a paladin that we're going to get to. Generally speaking, Flash of Light should not be used unless you absolutely have to, or if you're kind of topping yourself off in between fights, maybe because your healer is drinking to get mana back or something like that. Next on the list is Guardian of Ancient Kings. This is another big defensive ability, and this one's pretty straightforward and to the point. Instant cast, 5-minute cooldown. It empowers you with the Spirit of Ancient Kings, reducing all damage you take by 50% for 8 seconds. So whereas we have our Ardent Defender as an ability that will reduce some damage and also save us if we were to take damage that would kill us, so it's something we want to use at lower health, Guardian of Ancient Kings is an ability we can kind of use whenever. It's okay to use it when you're, up at a higher amount of your health, because it's just going to be a flat 50% damage reduction. There's no weird life-saving stuff. It's just good. If you're taking a lot of damage, or you're about to be taking a lot of damage, pop Guardian of Ancient Kings, cut it in half, help your healer out, help yourself stay alive. Our next ability is Hammer of Justice. This is a crowd control ability. I like to put those over here above our offensive cooldown abilities. This is your stun. It costs 700 mana, has a 10-yard range. It's instant cast with a 1-minute cooldown, and it stuns a target for 6 seconds. So this is really good. It'll interrupt spell casts. It'll lock down a priority target and prevent them from doing any of the crazy bad stuff that they're trying to do. And it's just, in general, a great ability to use, but you have to use it wisely because that 1-minute cooldown does definitely make a difference compared to some of your other abilities that can just interrupt targets but not stun them. Next, we have Hammer of the Righteous, and this is part of our core rotation. This is our filler ability, and when I say filler ability, I mean it's the ability we kind of hit in between all of our other more important abilities that we need to be hitting. This is a melee ability. It's instant cast. It has a 4.3 second recharge and comes with 2 charges by default. It will deal a little bit of damage to your primary target. It also has a nice secondary effect. So if you cast this ability while you're standing in your consecration, then it's going to cause a wave of light to radiate out and hit all other targets within 8 yards for a really small amount of damage, but you're getting a nice AoE attack, which is helping you deal damage and maintain threat on multiple targets. They're already standing in your consecration, most likely, so you're going to be dealing damage to them through that. Then you're going to hit them with Hammer of Righteous, deal a little bit of extra damage. So all in all, this is just really going to help you maintain threat on a bunch of targets, and it's one of the many reasons that Paladins are particularly good at AoE tanking. They just have so many moves that will do this AoE damage. Next, we have Hand of Reckoning. This is our Paladin utility ability. It's our taunt. It's a instant cast ability, costs 600 mana, has a 30-yard range and an 8-second cooldown, and it will command the attention of an enemy target, forcing them to attack you. So this is great if for some reason one of your party members has the full attention of an enemy and you just can't seem to get a hold of them, then you can use Hand of Reckoning to get them to focus on you. The thing to make notice of is that some enemies will do a thing where they focus on a particular target. And generally, if they're going to focus on a target or become fixated on a target, it will tell you in your chat log, or if you have an add-on, it may pop up and tell you in the middle of your screen. But if an enemy's fixated on one of your party members, you're not going to be able to pull them away with the taunt. So don't waste your Hand of Reckoning on an enemy that's fixated on one of your party members. Now what you can do is wait until right after they're finished being fixated and pull them off immediately with your taunt. So it's better to save it for right after that and try to get them immediately off of that character than it is to try to just throw that out and have it do nothing. Next up, we have Judgement. Judgement is part of our core rotation. This is a ranged ability. It has a 30-yard range. It's instant cast with a 5.7-second cooldown. It judges the target, dealing a significant amount of holy damage to them, and reducing the remaining cooldown on Shield of the Righteous by 2 seconds or 4 seconds if you critically strike. Now, we're going to come back and talk about that portion of it when we get to the Shield of the Righteous ability, but for now, just know that Judgement does a pretty good chunk of damage to your target, and it makes one of your core rotation abilities, Shield of the Righteous, even better. It allows you to use it much more often. Next, we have our big bad, huge defensive cooldown, Lay on Hands. This is a ranged ability, has a 40-yard range. It's instant cast, has a 10-minute cooldown, the longest cooldown of any that we have. It heals a friendly target, including yourself, if you want to target yourself, for an amount equal to your maximum health. So for you, this is a guaranteed 100% full heal, and for most other characters, it's also going to be a 100% full heal, because as a tank, you will generally have more of the stamina stat than other specializations, and because of that, your health pool will probably be larger than other characters. So when you heal them for amount equal to your maximum health is higher than their maximum health, so it's 100% full heal. This is our last ability that causes the Forbearance effect, so you can't cast this on targets with Forbearance, and when you cast this on a target, they will gain Forbearance after that. Next up, we have Light of the Protector, and this is a healing utility ability that we actually will use, unlike Flash of Light. So this is an instant cast ability with a 16-second cooldown. It calls down the light to heal you for 15,000. Increased by up to 200% based on your missing health. So let's compare this to Flash of Light real quick. First of all, it doesn't cost any mana, so we're not going to run into that mana issue. It does have a cooldown, which means that even though we can spam Flash of Light until we're out of mana, we're not going to be able to do that with Light of the Protector. We have to use the cooldown in a smart manner. But there's an additional bonus here that the lower your health is, the more healing Light of the Protector is going to do. So by default, it's healing for about 15,000, but the more health you're missing, the more it's going to heal for. So this is really good. You don't really want to use this when you're close to max health. You want to use it when you're at like 80 or 70 or 60% health, and then you're going to get a big heal that's going to put you back up to probably either full health or within 10 to 15% under that. So this is a really good healing ability. Now, we did have one other ability that ties back into Light of the Protector, and that is our Avenging Wrath. So the first Light of the Protector that you do after you cast Avenging Wrath is going to critically strike. So what that means is whenever you hit Avenging Wrath, you're going to get all those offensive abilities, and the first time you need to cast Light of the Protector on yourself, it's going to be a guaranteed critical strike and give you a nice big chunk of healing. Our next ability is Rebuke, and this is a crowd control ability. It's our Interrupt. So it's a melee ranged ability, instant cast with a 15-second cooldown. This is going to interrupt spell casting and prevent any spell in that school from being cast for 4 seconds. So this is going to be the ability that you use as your standard interrupt. You do have your stun if you need it, but that's better saved to completely shut down an enemy. And you do have your Avenger Shield, which will interrupt, but as I said before, you're going to be using that in the regular rotation, the regular flow of what you're doing in combat, so you might not have it available when you need it. So generally speaking, Rebuke is going to be that go-to interrupt ability. Next, we have Redemption. We're going to throw this over to the side. You can't use this in combat. It's our Paladin Res. Costs 800 mana, has a 40-yard range, 9.6-second cast, and this brings a dead ally back to life with 35% of their maximum health and mana. So this is something we could use if we need it, but we're not going to be messing with it in combat, so we'll throw it off to the side where it's out of our way and not distracting us. And our final active ability is Shield of the Righteous, and this is part of our core rotation. We've already seen this come up in a couple of other abilities. This is crucial to playing a Protection Paladin. So this is a melee ranged ability, instant cast, 17-second recharge, and it comes with 3 charges, unlike the typical 2 we've had for most of our other abilities. This is going to slam enemies in front of you. with your shield, dealing a decent amount of holy damage, and increasing your armor by a pretty significant amount for 4.5 seconds. So let's break this down. First off, we're getting to hit all the enemies in front of us. So we've got that AoE damage. That's going to help us kill things. That's going to help us maintain threat. Next up, we have the increase in our armor for 4.5 seconds. So that's going to make us more tanky. It's going to make us take less physical damage. So this is both a little bit of an offensive threat burst as well as a defensive ability. So let's look at the other two abilities that tied into this and see how they might affect the way this plays. So the first one is Judgment, and this one is pretty simple. Anytime we cast Judgment on a target, it's going to reduce the cooldown on one of our recharges of Shield of the Righteous by 2 seconds. If we critically strike when we cast Judgment, it's going to instead reduce it by 4 seconds. So casting Judgment means we reduce the cooldown on Shield of the Righteous, we get to use it more often, we get to have that armor buff more often, and we get to deal that little bit of damage and threat increase as well more often. Then when we take a look at Avenger Shield, if we look at the second paragraph here, it says, increase the effects of your next Shield of the Righteous by 20%. So when we cast Avenger Shield, our next Shield of the Righteous is going to deal increased damage, and we're going to gain increased armor from it. So the general way this is going to play out, without getting too much into the rotation, is you cast your Avenger Shield, you get the 20% increase to your next Shield of the Righteous, so you hit Shield of the Righteous and get the increased bonus from that. Then you start casting your Judgments to reduce the cooldown on your charges of Shield of the Righteous. And that's just kind of the general synergy for how those work. The last thing to talk about here are our passive abilities, starting with Grand Crusader. When you avoid a melee attack or use Hammer of the Righteous, you have a 15% chance to reset the cooldown on Avenger's Shield. So, if you like throwing your shield around like Captain America, this is the ability that's going to let you do that much more often. It's super cool. It's one of the most fun things about tanking on a paladin is just chucking that shield out over and over again. So whenever we avoid a melee attack, when we dodge or whatever, we have a 15% chance to reset the cooldown on our nice little shield throw ability. But also, anytime we use Hammer of the Righteous, which is our little filler ability that does a little AoE if we're standing in Consecration, we also have a 15% chance. So that's another reason to fill the void with Hammer of Righteous, because every time you do that, you're getting that 15% chance to get to throw your shield again, and that's really important and just really cool. Our next passive ability is Heart of the Crusader, and this is something all paladins have. You move 20% faster while mounted. This does not stack with other movement speed increasing effects, so this is just nice. It doesn't really come into play too much when you're out there tanking in dungeons and raids, unless you have one where they have a little outdoor area and you can mount up, and then you can kind of stay ahead of the pack and make sure you get there first, and you get the initial hit in and start gaining that threat on those enemies before some of your over-eager party members might do so. And our final passive ability here is our Mastery, Divine Bulwark. Your numbers are going to vary based on how much mastery you have, but this is going to reduce all damage taken while inside your Consecration by 6.5%. It's going to increase your chance to block melee attacks by 18.7%, and it's also going to increase your attack power by the same amount. So we got 3 things going on here. We have the increased attack power, which is pretty standard for most tanking passives. We have the increased chance to block melee attacks, so that's going to be really nice for us as well. And we have another reason to stay inside of our Consecration, and that's because we're going to have just a flat 6.5% damage reduction for being in there. So we want to be in that Consecration because we want to be tanking the enemies in there, so they're taking the damage from it. We want our Hammer of the Righteous to do its little AoE attack, and we want our passive 6.5% damage reduction from our Mastery as well. So all good reasons to put down Consecration and stay in it. So that was your in-depth overview of all the spells and abilities available to the Protection Paladin by default. In the next video, we're going to take a look at our core rotation and how those abilities all work together in some common tanking scenarios, such as pulling a group, pulling multiple groups, or we're going to cover topics like how do you play a little bit more aggressively, or how do you play a little bit more defensively if you need to. All that stuff and more is coming up next. Thanks for watching. I encourage you to do all the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell if you enjoyed this video or this series of guides. Also, if you're interested, you can support the channel on Patreon at patreon.com/Setsuko, where you'll gain access to our Discord channel, behind the scenes footage, the opportunity to get involved with the direction of the channel, and more. You can also check out my website, setsuko.com, for even more content about all sorts of geeky, nerdy topics. I hope you're having fun in whatever it is that you're doing, and as always, I'll see you on the next video.